The most capable navy on Earth has been told by its own intelligence that it would lose a long war. One American slide, built from public data, puts Chinese shipbuilding capacity at roughly 232 times the capacity of the United States. Not 232%, roughly 232 times. And the number is not about the ships that exist today. It is about the machine that builds them, repairs them, and replaces them when they burn. That machine is the real control point of a Pacific war, and this is who owns it. Every naval comparison you have seen counts the wrong thing. It counts ships, missiles, carriers, a photograph of a single moment. A war does not fight a photograph. A war burns hulls, then asks each side the same question every year until one of them cannot answer it. How many ships can you put back in the water? The United States wins the photograph. Nuclear carriers, quieter submarines, better trained crews, but quality is a stock, and war consumes stocks. The contest that decides year 3 is a race between two industrial systems, and one of those systems barely exists anymore. The evidence is not Chinese propaganda. The most damaging documents in this story are American. The Navy's intelligence office drew the chart. The Government Accountability Office wrote the backlog reports. The Navy's own FY 2026 plan lists the retirements. The case against quality beats quantity was written in Washington by Washington about Washington. In 2024, the Office of Naval Intelligence produced a slide, later confirmed by Navy officials as built from public sources, visualizing Chinese shipbuilding capacity at roughly 232 times the level of the United States. The instinct is to reject it. Nobody outbuilds anyone 232 to 1, so the number must be propaganda or a misreading. The instinct misunderstands what the slide measures. It does not count warships launched per year. It measures capacity, dry dock slots, the aggregate tonnage a nation's yards can process, how fast a hull moves through the line, commercial and naval yards counted together, because in China, they are frequently the same yards. As an exact multiple, the ratio is analytic, and it is debatable at the margin. As a direction and a scale, it is not, and one confirmed figure anchors it. Chinese commercial shipbuilding accounts for about half of global output by deadweight tonnage. American commercial shipbuilding accounts for a single-digit fraction. China builds roughly half the world's ships. The United States builds a rounding error. Once that anchor is in place, the slide stops being a provocation and becomes a definition. A navy is not the list of ships it owns. A navy is the rate at which it can return hulls to the water, repaired or newly built. Stock versus flow. Every argument that follows runs on that one distinction. The belief to bury here, that fleet comparison charts tell you who wins. They only tell you who starts ahead. The number is not the story. The story is what the number is made of, and it is made of steel you can visit. The ratio is built from physical places with names and addresses, and knowing the metric means nothing until you see where the flow comes from. America still has the shipbuilding base it used to win past wars. It is idling, waiting for the order. That base was liquidated across 40 years, and the yards that replaced nothing were built on the other side of the Pacific. China's state-owned conglomerates run Jiangnan, Dalian, and Hudong-Zhonghua as dual-use complexes. The same dry docks, the same welders, the same steel flow feed hundreds of merchant hulls per year, and alongside them, destroyers, frigates, and carriers. Type 052D destroyers come off the line in parallel, keel to commissioning in a few years. The commercial order book pays for the workforce, and the Navy borrows that workforce whenever it needs it. The United States consolidated the opposite direction down to a handful of yards: Bath Iron Works in Maine, Huntington Ingalls at Newport News and at Pascagoula, NASCO in San Diego, every one of them fully loaded with existing programs. No surge margin anywhere in the system. The fleets reflect it. The People's Liberation Army Navy now fields over 370 battle force ships. The US fleet sits at roughly 290 to 300. Under the old model, that gap looks manageable, offset by quality. Under the flow model, the gap is not a snapshot. It compounds every year the machine runs. China did not build a bigger navy beside its shipping industry. It fused the two into one machine. The belief to bury here, that shipyard capacity is a background industry that expands on command. It is decades of accumulated capital, labor, and supply chain, and one side kept it while the other sold it off. A handful of fully loaded yards raises the question worth asking before any wargame. How is this small system performing right now, in peacetime, with zero battle damage? The answer is already on paper, a decade of it. 4 public naval shipyards carry the nuclear workload for the entire fleet: Norfolk, Portsmouth, Puget Sound, and Pearl Harbor. The Government Accountability Office has documented, in report after report across 10 years, attack submarines and surface combatants overrunning their maintenance windows by months, and in some cases by years, cutting the number of hulls actually available to deploy. The choke points are named in the record. Dry dock slots sized for the largest combatants and permanently scarce. Shortages of welders, shipfitters, and nuclear-qualified trades. Budget cycles that halt and restart work midstream. The Virginia-class attack submarine and Columbia-class programs both run multi-year delays on top of it. Those delays get filed as bureaucratic waste, a budget story. They are a measurement. The peacetime backlog is the wartime repair queue, running live, published annually. Battle damage does not enter an empty system, it joins a line. America's wartime repair queue already exists, and it was full before the first shot. The belief to bury here that the overruns are inefficiency. They are the opening condition of the next war, printed in public every year, and Beijing has a subscription. If this is the kind of analysis you want more of, subscribing is how you keep getting it. Everything so far assumed peace. Now run the same system with ships coming back on fire. The intuitive read is that a US-China war would be short and sharp, decided by the fleet in being on day one. The operational reality is that no planner on either side can guarantee a short war, and a long war reduces to a single variable per side. Hulls returned to the fight per year, repaired plus newly built. The reflex answer is Pearl Harbor. America mobilized once, so it can mobilize again. But 1942 drew on hundreds of active commercial yards and a maritime workforce already in place, building Liberty ships that were, by design, simple hulls. A modern combatant takes years from keel to commissioning. An Aegis destroyer is not a Liberty ship, and a nuclear-qualified welder takes longer to produce than the ship does. There is no dormant base waiting for the order, because the base is what Section 2 watched disappear. That leaves the attrition math naked. China can convert commercial capacity to naval work at scale in home waters under land-based air cover. The United States repairs through 4 public yards already saturated an ocean away. This conclusion is the thesis the confirmed documents force. China's replacement rate is large, and America's approach is zero. A superior ship that cannot be replaced converges toward zero, and the math runs before the war does. If Beijing believes it can absorb early losses and outbuild Washington across years, its willingness to accept the fight rises. Beijing can read GAO reports too. The industrial gap does not just shape the war, it shapes whether the war starts. The belief to bury here that deterrence rests on the fleet that exists. It rests on the fleet that can be rebuilt, and the other side has already done that arithmetic. Washington can read every report you just heard. So watch what it is actually doing this year. Everyone in Washington agrees on 2 things. The Pacific is the priority theater, and contested logistics is the Navy's own named vulnerability there. What that agreement hides is the FY 2026 plan. In FY 2026, the Navy plans to inactivate or transfer 8 ships, among them 2 Henry J. Kaiser-class replenishment oilers and several pre-positioning vessels. USNS John Erickson retires to become a parts source. USNS Pecos transfers to the Maritime Administration. USNS Vice Admiral K.R. Wheeler, an offshore petroleum distribution ship built to pump fuel ashore from 8 miles out, is slated for transfer in 2026. An oiler is not a hull count. It is fuel throughput per day, and each one removed is throughput subtracted from the largest ocean on Earth. There is a counterweight, and it deserves honest framing. General Dynamics. NASSCO is contracted to build 17 of the planned 20 John Lewis-class fleet oilers, with funding for TAO 217 announced in May 2026 to support Pacific operations. That is real construction. Against Pacific requirements, it is replacement under strain, not growth, and the new hulls arrive more slowly than the old ones leave. In fiscal year 2026, the ships leaving the fleet are the ships that carry the fuel. The reason nobody notices is mechanical. Retirements are reported as hull count changes, not capability flow changes, so gallons per day vanish without a headline. The belief to bury here, that the support fleet is growing to match the stated threat. The ledger says the opposite, 1 gray hull at a time. There is a fix on the table. It just is not American. And that is the part nobody wants to say out loud. Allied shipyards are a nice bonus on top of American capacity. In congressional testimony and U.S. naval commentary, South Korean and Japanese yards, the second and third largest shipbuilders on Earth, Hyundai Heavy Industries and DSME by name, are being discussed as the realistic path for repairing and possibly building American auxiliaries. The discussion is confirmed. What it means is analysis, and the analysis cuts one way. If American war plans assume access to foreign dry docks, then Korean and Japanese industrial policy becomes an American security variable. Seoul and Tokyo gain leverage they never asked for and inherit risk they cannot refuse because their yards become day-one targets and pressure points for Beijing. Legal, political, and classification friction keeps frontline warship construction abroad hard, so the dependency concentrates exactly where the FY 2026 cuts landed. The auxiliaries and the repair work. Subic Bay in the Philippines can plausibly host repair work at the margin, small in scale, and politically loud. This only makes sense because of everything underneath it. The metric said, flow decides. The machine sits in China. The domestic queue is full. The mobilization myth is dead. The support fleet is shrinking. Foreign dry docks are what remains. The country that owned the arsenal now negotiates for access to other people's dry docks. The belief you have to abandon, and it is the belief this entire argument was built to reach, that American shipbuilding supremacy is a sleeping capability. It is not asleep. It is gone. The U.S. Navy's own documents describe the gap, and the current plan for a long Pacific War runs through shipyards Washington does not own. Install the corrected model, and everything downstream reads differently. Fleet comparison charts become opening positions, not verdicts. Maintenance overruns become strategic intelligence that Beijing collects for free from public GAO filings. A retirement notice becomes a capability subtraction measured in gallons per day. An alliance summit becomes an industrial negotiation in which the direction of need has quietly reversed. The reason the old model survived so long is structural, not stupid. Order of battle is visible, photogenic, and easy to chart. Throughput is boring, distributed, and almost never quantified in the same graphic, so the public debate optimized for the metric it could see. Measure the system behind the asset instead, and the entire US-China naval question inverts. The contest is not between two fleets. It is between one industrial machine and the memory of another. The arsenal of democracy was not mothballed for a future emergency. It was consolidated, sold, and scrapped across 40 years. And the long war it was supposed to win is now planned around dry docks that fly other flags. You made it to the end, which means you think the way this channel thinks. Subscribe and the next one finds you.